If you dream of hardtails, hemlock, ponderosa, rhododendron, and dust, then Knebal Springs and Bottle Prairie are the kinds of trails that bring comfort to your slumber. I'm not really sure how I'm supposed to pronounce Knebal Springs. Knebal? Whatever. Knebal Springs it is. The Knebal Springs to Bottle Prairie Loop is yet another of the venerable 44 road trails located off the 44 road on the ridge facing the east side of Mount Hood. From Highway 35, heading south from Hood River, turn left on the 44 road, also known as Brooks Meadow Road, and drive about 5.2 miles to this intersection with Brooks Meadow Road. When you get to this intersection, go straight rather than following the road to the right. Now drive another 3 miles on this nicely graded gravel road to the turnoff for the Knebal Springs campground. Drive down the campground road, where you'll discover a giant turnaround and not enough parking at the bottom of the campground. From the parking area, proceed to the highly visible trailhead and ride a few hundred feet to this sign. Turn right at the sign. You want to climb Knebal Springs and descend Bottle Prairie. Knebal Springs Trail sort of roughly parallels Brooks Meadow Road for the first 2 miles. Sometimes you can even see the road from the trail. The trail surface is buff and smooth for the most part. This is a hardtail friendly trail. It's old school in a you could totally ride this on a fully rigid trek that you got for free with your Jetta back in the 90s kind of way. There are occasional roots across the trail, but the soil consistency is mostly just the sandy volcanic ash typical of the east side of the Oregon Cascades. The hammer rocks usually embedded in the clay on the west side of the Cascades are mostly non-existent here. Sandy Ridge is only 41 road miles away from here, and yet the two climates and vegetation are completely different, except for the Douglas fir. They both have big firs in common. Otherwise, the underbrush is an entirely different composition. Where the west side of the mountains contains thick underbrush of bushes and vine maple, this forest is free of the vine maple scourge in favor of rhododendron. When this trail dries out, it just turns into deeper and deeper dust. Anyway, it's a smooth climb. Bring your beginner friends. If they're in reasonable shape, they'll find this trail just challenging enough to feel they accomplished something when you're done with the loop. The climb up Knebal Springs does get progressively steeper and more technical as it progresses. At almost exactly 2 miles, you'll come to the first road intersection. Turn right on the road here and keep riding for about 1,000 feet. It'll feel like forever, but the trail will eventually reappear up on your left. Fortunately, all the road intersections are pretty well signed. After the first road intersection, the trail proceeds south for another 1,700 feet with 155 feet of climbing until you're at the second road intersection. This one's easy. Just turn left, and after about 50 feet, the trail continues on the right. After another half mile and 270 feet of climbing, the trail sort of turns into a deteriorating road grade. Ride about another 100 feet and you'll see the trail continuing to the left. Don't ride down the road. No one knows where that goes. Another 0.7 miles and 70 feet of climbing on relatively flat trail that passes by some openings created by ill-advised Reagan-era clear cuts, you'll finally arrive at the beginning of the first descent. It's a short, relatively smooth, and fast enough descent that has some turns in it and sort of meanders through some stands of lodgepole and goes up and down. They've added some swoops from side to side to add some turns to it, probably to try to slow you down a little bit. After 2,200 feet of trail and 250 feet of elevation loss, you'll come to a road intersection. It's pretty obvious where the trail picks up from here. It's another 1,200 feet of trail and 85 feet of elevation lost at this point, the junction with Bottle Prairie Trail. At this junction, you don't want to go to the right. Don't go to the right. You want to go left. Up the hill, so go left. After another 2,100 feet of trail and 150 feet of elevation gain, you'll come to the intersection with 8 Mile. Again, you'll want to continue left up the hill here. After another 1,800 feet of trail and another 150 feet of climbing, you'll come across a sign marking the junction to a little side trail that leads to a very disappointing viewpoint called Prairie Point. It looks like it probably had a pretty cool view before the trees around it got big. You can kind of see Mount Adams through the trees, and there are glimpses of Central Oregon desert through some gaps, but overall this side excursion wasn't really worth your time. Fortunately, it also wasn't very long, so now you can get your bike back on the trail. You've only got 200 feet of trail and 35 feet of elevation gain before the next big downhill starts. The downhill on Bottle Prairie is a fast and smooth good time. Don't get complacent though, because the thing about the soil on this side of the mountains is that even if the trail builders wanted to craft berms or any other features that would make the descent easier on a mountain bike, the dirt is just too sandy to hold together, so you get nothing. With a few exceptions, every single outside turn leaves you completely exposed to the downhill slope. There are also some pretty frightening surprise turns. If you like to pin it, this trail is going to find some way to punish you for that behavior. Just keep your eyes ahead and stay awake. After about a mile and a half, you'll have lost about 600 feet of elevation and you'll come across this weird looking intersection with an old dirt road. Ignore the road. Don't even bother slowing down, just keep going forward. The road means nothing. You've got another 0.9 miles of downhill left before you come to this confusing intersection. Don't worry, just go left. You get a few hundred more feet of downhill, then the trail starts climbing up the hill again. After a short climb of 80 feet over 1,300 feet of trail, you'll come to this intersection. You'll be frightened that you're not going to find the trail, but just go left, right along the road for 200 feet, and you'll see the trail continue on your right. This is the beginning of one of the funnest downhill sections on the whole ride. It's a tight and dark side hill that doesn't have too many turns that you can wash out on. There's always somewhere to put your wheel. It has a couple of mild stream crossings, but otherwise flows pretty well until it leads you to this big blown out stream crossing where you're just going to have to accept that your brand new 510s are going to get wet. Hopefully you enjoyed that last section of downhill, because it's a steep 200 feet of elevation over 1,700 feet to get out of here. Seriously, this is some of the steepest climbing you'll do on the whole ride, but at least it's over relatively soon. After you've summited this final climb, the trail drops you gradually back to right where you started, at Knebal Springs Campground. I'd recommend this trail as part of a bigger stacked loop. Maybe work 8 Mile into it or ride it after Surveyor's Ridge. Unless you live in Hood River, it's kind of a long drive to just ride this loop, unless you're with a beginner. This is the perfect ride for a beginner to get comfortable on their bike. It's also cool just because the forest in here is transitional and it smells like Ponderosa pine. This one's worth your time. Now get out there and go ride your bike.